for the evening session.
Good. I never worry about those. I know it's never going to be an issue.
Not in Israel?
Not in Israel. Not in Israel.
I'm worried that we have only like 12 hours till tomorrow's session.
Yeah,
Only 12 hours for the question and answer session.
I'm like, we didn't have a day.
Last time I stretched it a little bit. I went until 9 o'clock and people were like, oh. So let's see.
Challenge us.
Okay, all right. Now, verse number 5, all it's saying is that mental fabrication gives rise to the exaggerated conceptual thought, which gives rise to karma and afflictions. That's, in other words, what it says here. So, mental fabrication, which is the misapprehension of reality, leads to exaggerated thoughts, and that in turn gives rise to afflictions, different afflictive emotions, and karma, and is responsible for us being reborn. So that process, misapprehension, exaggerated attitude, exaggerated or inappropriate attitude, giving rise to other afflictive views and afflictive emotions, and giving rise to rebirth. Now these, therefore, what we need to eliminate, therefore, karma and affliction, of course, we identify as the culprits, as that which is responsible for our trouble. So if we eliminate them, there's liberation, but we can only eliminate them if we eliminate the causes, the root causes of that. And that is the fabrication, the mental fabrication, in other words, the misapprehension, the root ignorance. That ceases either through emptiness, so as His Holiness explains it, either through the understanding of emptiness, or within emptiness, which is a little difficult, it's like the cessation, within the cessation of suffering. So within emptiness, well, you could also say within in the sense that when you realize emptiness, your mind and the object become one. So you're like absorbed within emptiness. It's not just through, as in like your understanding of emptiness, so by understanding emptiness, but it's like your mind is within emptiness, so direct perception of emptiness, or as His Holiness usually says, the cessation, within the cessation of emptiness. So within the cessation, within emptiness, which basically refers to the cessation of suffering, so within that, fabrication ceases.
I think maybe this verse is an argument, a discussion with other schools, because it says, first of all, it uses moksha, liberation, which is not usually the term from Buddhist text, no? It's like more the Hindu term for you.
Yes.
And then it says, yes, it's true, moksha comes from the end of karma, which agreed by like the Jain, the Jain would say, you reach liberation by ending your karma. But this can only be achieved by ceasing shunyata, by arriving to.
Right. So that's very beautiful. Of course, here also it starts with no self, doesn't really talk about emptiness as such. So there is definitely a sense also in other non-Buddhist schools that the self is the culprit, a misapprehension of the self, but of course perceiving it in a way that is not in accordance with Buddhism. But then as Boaz says, and also in definitely understanding karma and affliction are the trouble, craving, anger, etc. are the trouble. But the actual trouble from a Buddhist point of view, so moksha, that what you perceive as nirvana, not using the word nirvana, but using the word moksha, which is the term used for liberation. Well, what you're saying, yes, that is all right, but you need to actually get at the crux of the problem. So I just repeated what Boaz said to make sure you can hear it everywhere. But yeah, so that's a good point. This is also where it's nice to have the Sanskrit here, because from the Tibetan it's not obvious that the word they use is the word tarpa. Tarpa, whether you say moksha or you say nirvana, in Tibetan it's the same word. So it talks about the nirvana, or the liberation of non-Buddhists. They use the word tarpa. The liberation of, but in Sanskrit you have two words, different words, and moksha is more the word that is used in the Hindu tradition, nirvana is more used in the Buddhist tradition, and here is moksha. Yes, okay, great, that's helpful, wonderful. Anyway, this verse number 5, so you can see first verse number 1, there's no I. Number 2, therefore there's no mine. Number 3, well, even that which realizes there's no I, there's no mine, that also doesn't exist inherently. I mean, when I say no I, means no inherent I, no inherent mine. So even that which realizes that doesn't exist inherently. And what is the goal of realizing that? Liberation. And how do you go about it? Through a gradual process. Eliminating the root, and in that way you eliminate the rest. Great. Okay. Now then, verse 6, it's saying that the Buddha taught this gradually. So there's a gradual way of eliminating, getting at the root. In that way, step by step, you get rid of the effects of the misapprehension of reality. And how did the Buddha go about it? How did he introduce this idea? That was also gradual. So the Buddha is designated a self. He said he taught a self at times. As I mentioned before, they were the Charvakas, and some of the followers of the Charvaka system would say, no, there's no karma, there's no rebirth, there's no I, there's nothing there. So therefore my actions don't have consequences. No one is there to experience that. And in response to that, that was not a healthy sense of an I or no I. That is just denying, that is annihilation. It's annihilating, or it's refuting too much, falling to an extreme of nihilism, which can be potentially dangerous. I mean, usually we're not consequent with our view of nihilism. It's not like, oh, I don't exist, so I'm not going to have dinner. It doesn't go like the sense of like you fall into the extreme of nihilism really doesn't go to the extent like, oh, I believe there's nothing there. You kind of very conveniently pick the pieces that you decide are not there. My actions don't have consequences, so I can just go ahead and do whatever I want. And so in that sense, like being nihilistic is really like when you do the opposite. The opposite of the extreme of nihilism is the extreme of eternalism, or reification is another word. Pardon? Determinism? No, that's different. Determinism has a different meaning. Reification, permanence, eternalism, hypostatization. Hypostatization, that's a ridiculous word, right? Wait, I have to look it up, make sure I get it right. I think it's hypostatization. And I was like, oh, I look up the German, that's easiest. And of course it's Hypostasierung. Didn't help. I don't know exactly. And then I looked it up, the English word for it, and it means to exaggerate what's actually there, to give things more of a concreteness. Does anyone have internet that works? Can you Google? Oh, you can't, you don't have...
I have Merriam-Webster.
Can you use that, please?
Yes. What is the word?
Hypostatization. I think that's what it is. I hope I remember it correctly. But I don't mind a good word that has a meaning that describes that nicely, except, of course, in this case, we don't know. Statization, I think it is. But maybe I got it wrong. I can't find it right away. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that it's this extreme of adding too much than there actually is.
Fabricating more fabrication.
Like more fabrication, yeah, like basically fabricating more of what actually exists. So, therefore, the Charvakas have fallen into the other extremes, but of course only with regard to cause and effect and rebirth. That's usually what falls away. The rest is like... keeps falling off. The rest is like... The rest is like, yeah, they still do whatever they do. It's
hypostatize is to attribute real identity to a concept.
Right? Nice.
From the Greek.
From the Greek. Oh yeah, it can only be the Greeks. Come up with something like hypo. Yeah, great. So it's like adding more, kind of making it more adding attributes that something doesn't exist. So it has that kind of notion. Okay. All right. But if we deny too much, then the sense of a self could be helpful. If in case of the Charvakas, oh, nothing really exists. And it reminds me of modern psychology too. If there's no sense of an I don't think it's a good idea to teach selflessness. For those who have no sense of an identity, like a healthy sense of an I mean, what is healthy? What is healthy? Very hard to determine, because of course...
Conventionally healthy.
No, even conventionally, what is healthy? In comparison to the Buddha, we all have crazy mental disorders, right? Pardon? Well, we kind of, people suffer, but they don't have to be mentally... Yeah, I mean, those words, it's actually very difficult when we say bipolar disorder or, you know, like when I meet people who have these extreme mental disorders and they tell me their symptoms, I'm thinking, I have those, a little bit. I always identify, because to a certain degree we all have them, right? Like bipolar. Sometimes I feel low and sometimes I'm high. Of course it's an exaggerated form, but in general it's very difficult. Like when we apply these words, like autism for instance, there's so many different spectrums of autism. So where do I belong to? And we hypostatize, we make things more concrete than they are. We put on this label and we think the person is totally out of their mind or something, but we are pretty much out of our mind oftentimes. So these are just labels, and they can be helpful for understanding, but we need to know that we are also part of the scale, so that there's a beautiful documentary I once watched. It really impressed me. It's called How Mad Are We? I think that's what it's called. And it's this experiment where psychologists, there's a group of people who volunteered to... You've heard about it? Who volunteered. One of them has OCD, another one has depression and bipolar disorder, the most common disorders. But no one knows who suffers from what. And there are these psychologists that have to observe them and now figure who has what. Honestly, OCD I can recognize. The guy did not want to clean a cow stable that was really dirty. He was like, well, I can't do it. I was like, oh God, he's got OCD, I can tell. Right? It's like, and he was so obvious about it. Like, oh, I need to wash my hands. So of course they couldn't tell. But it was very interesting. They couldn't tell with the other ones. For instance, one person had to determine he or she's totally healthy, nothing wrong with them. That was part of it. And they said to this woman, and I determined the same. I thought, oh, she's so together, she's so down to earth, nothing wrong with her. And she's like suffering from depression. Couldn't tell. Very down to earth, very hard to tell. And it gave me a good sense of, it's really difficult. We can't tell from the outside. And in general, we all suffer from some form. But however difficult it is, there are extreme cases, and we can definitely tell. So Buddhism is not meant for those. Buddhism in its form right now. It was taught by the Buddha to those who are in general not suffering from what we would call a disorder. Of course, this is where Buddhism psychology comes in. Now psychology deals with certain disorders and helping the person to get better using Buddhist ideas, right? Using those methods to help the person to get better so that then they can continue from there. So psychology in this day and age is so important because they have an understanding of many of these diseases, how we can deal with them, how we can possibly build a healthy sense of an I, as the Buddha did in this case. So building a healthy sense, there you talk about I, don't talk about selflessness, basically. Build a strong sense of I and then slash it. So that's what exactly happened here. So the Buddha designated a self, with regard to the Charvakas, for instance, and taught there's no self. And then he said there was no self. So he taught, basically, some philosophers, he didn't talk about phenomena other than the self. He always talked about just self. There's a self. And then, at some point, he thought that there's neither self nor selflessness. So saying that there's neither an inherently existent self nor an inherently existent selflessness.
It refers to the three tenets of the will, right? First, second, third?
First, second, and third?
The first is there is self.
There is
There is
no.
self in none of
During the
them.
first wheel, the Buddha taught there's no self. The Buddha always taught there's no self in the Buddhist context. So when you talk about the three wheels, they're strictly Buddhist. He also taught there's self, but they're not said to be part of those wheels, strictly speaking. Because in the first wheel, he introduced the Four Noble Truths and how to become liberated. He definitely talked about no self. But he stressed more no self. He didn't stress so much phenomena other than, I mean, he also taught emptiness actually, but implicitly. So not everyone, it was not clear to everyone during the first turning of the wheel. He seemed to imply, so to some it seemed like phenomena exist inherently and truly. While with the second wheel it was so obvious. It was it was lack of inherent existence all the way through. Or lack of true existence. But what I'm saying here is like forgetting about the three wheels, because that's just one way of differentiating the Buddha's teachings or of classifying the Buddha's teachings. But he taught self in certain contexts when it was necessary. Then he denied only the self. So no, there's no partless, permanent, kind of a separate kind of I, a self-sufficient I, but didn't go into lack of inherent existence. And then he also taught, well, even selflessness doesn't exist inherently, and so neither does the self. So explain the Madhyamika system, for instance. Okay, so gradually, depending on the person. Sometimes he taught it to one person first, he taught their self, then he taught there's no self, and then he taught emptiness, even within a short time when they were ready to hear it. For others, it took maybe a little bit longer before they were introduced to the final view.
Why plural?
Pardon?
Why plural Buddhas?
Yeah, I was going to look that up. When I translated that, I tried to be...
This is a question?
Why does it say Buddhas?
Yeah.
Why does it not say Buddha? Let me just go back to the Tibetan, actually. Now I don't remember the Tibetan there. Is it Sangyanam? What is it in Sanskrit?
It's plural.
It's plural? Okay, so it's probably Sanskrit, and it's also in Tibetan. Sangyanam Gitarani. Yeah, Sangyanam Danta. So the Buddhas taught. It's plural in Tibetan also. In Sanskrit it is, and in Tibetan. Well, of course, actually, it is important because there's so many Buddhas and they all teach. So every now and then, in this text and also in other texts, it stresses. Sometimes it just says Buddha, so it could refer to Buddha Shakyamuni. But of course, there are many Buddhas. So the Buddhas basically is stressing that the Buddhas use skillful means and sometimes teach this and sometimes teach that. Does that make sense? So maybe that was the time when they felt it was important. Nagarjuna felt it was important to stress that.
What does it mean, a selfless, inherently existent selflessness?
No inherently existent.
Yes, but what does it mean?
An independent emptiness. Emptiness is like exists independently. As if like there's something inherent, intrinsic in selflessness that just exists in and of itself. Just as if there's something intrinsic in the table, it exists inherently as a table, so even selflessness exists in and of itself. We may think that once we understand selflessness, oh, that is the truth, that exists truly. But that, of course, doesn't exist either, in that way. Right? It's important to stress. What is expressed? So once you understand emptiness, what is expressed is repudiated. Is negated, basically. It's repudiated. The objects of mind are repudiated. So it's saying, like, once you get to emptiness, the Buddha explains emptiness, even the words, like words, the way words appear to us, they appear to, when you hear a word and you start thinking about it, so the word appears to exist in and of itself. More solid than it actually is. And we can always tell, when you use a word, it seems like, oh, like if someone, this is like our whole sense of who I am, the whole sense of I has to do with the words. Other people tell us I'm stupid and then I believe I'm stupid. Isn't that bizarre? Other people tell me something and I start believing that. So I believe there's more. When someone uses the word, we believe there's concretely something there. All right? And so near it, he said he has a group that he teaches, and I thought it was very beautiful. In the West nowadays, we are defined by our curriculum vitae, right? The longer the list, Well, depending on what's on the list. I was in that prison, I was in that prison. No, that's not what you want on your curriculum vitae. But like usually they're like impressive things, and we work on making them sound good, you know. Spent 3 months in a kibbutz, I would maybe say spent 3 months in a socialistic based psychological blah blah blah, right? Make it sound like whoa. I mean, I've seen these curriculum vitae and I go, wow. I mean, all she's saying, she was a year at the IBD. It sounds like she's been like up in the mountain meditating on emptiness or whatever, right? It always sounds like so impressive, these curriculum vitae. So the point is, because of how we put it, people believe it. The words have this power, so we believe there's something truly there. And Nir was like saying, well, if you should go through your curriculum vitae and every time think, the I's not there. The I did not do this. The I did. There's no I that did this. The I did not that. Because our sense of I is really a collage of these points on a curriculum vitae, isn't it? Like I mean, like if you have that list in front of you, it's almost like you go through this list and you go, oh, that's me. You never really thought about it because you never really put them on the list. But once you put them on the list, you go, that's 15 points to be really impressed about, right? It's kind of like, now you believe it yourself. So it's like part of your collage, part of this is I. Okay, so we just keep adding. So it's those words that we use in that moment, those concepts, and they strengthen our sense of I. So which is why I like his meditation. Go through a curriculum vitae, write it all down and go, there's no I that did such. There's no I that did such. Right? And then he said, very beautiful, he said, and so if you think of your possessions, right? So there's the I that has a house, there's the I that has children, there's the I that has this and has that, and then to think, but there is no I that has this, and there's no I. And he said some people felt kind of like, oh, thanks God, the burden of possession. It almost like felt like it was a little bit lighter, because the burden of having mine actually comes along with this responsibility and that worry and having to clean this and having to take care, right? So there's a sense of release also. It comes with a heavy burden. But anyway, here what this is saying, what is expressed is repudiated. So all the words we use to describe ourselves, to describe other things, actually, well, that's also, we let go of that because there's no real substance behind it. So that is repudiated. The objects of the mind that exaggerates, the mind that is affected by the misapprehension, that is also repudiated. So basically not generated and unceased. Nothing inherently comes into existence and nothing goes inherently out of existence. Suchness is like nirvana. Okay, the suchness is like nirvana, it's liberation. So suchness is that state of the absence of any type of afflictions, because even nirvana itself doesn't exist inherently. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, first, how did the Buddha teach it? And then look at what did the Buddha teach. There's no self, there's no selflessness. There's no inherent, no objective self, there's no objective selflessness. Okay? It's only an interdependent, merely labeled one. And what is expressed is also merely labeled. What is the mind takes to our thoughts take to mind. We believe so much in our thoughts. It's unbelievable. You know, I had this experience yesterday. It was so bizarre. When my cousin, she died. I have a cousin, and unfortunately she died this year. I was quite close to her, but I wasn't attached to her because we hardly ever met. That's good, actually, in terms of my personal. But she had cancer and she died. But we had a really nice meeting last year. She came to my home and we had lovely dinner. And it's very lively in my memory. And I had this thought, and suddenly I went back to that dinner. It was so clearly there. And I thought, she can't be dead. I had this thought because she was so vividly there. She was so alive. And then I thought, she can't be dead. I caught myself thinking, how could she be dead? She was so alive. I thought, oh my God, look at your own mind. Because I had this thought where she very vividly and intrinsically appeared, she must still be there. How could she be dead? How could she have moved on and now be in a different body? Right? So it gave me a good sense of how my thought in that moment gave me a sense that she would still be around, unchanging. see how if I hadn't caught it in that moment, it was great because I could see my own mind going, yeah, right. That's my reason for why someone could not be dead. But it was so vivid in that moment that my present memory of it seemed to be there right now. She seems to be there right now. So actually these objects of our thoughts, that's what creates our reality. It's less our sense perception, it's what we do with it mentally. So we keep creating this world we live in. And that's very uniquely different. Very uniquely different. So really our thoughts, they keep thinking it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, it's like that. And that's the reality that I now believe to be out there. Right? It's all just my thoughts. And so the sense of I is a collage of thoughts. I'm like this. I'm like that. And then I believe this thought that I have, I believe that this thought arose because it's really like that. And I just recognized it as such. Okay? But that this is not true, well, I give you one example, and then after that we have a meditation. The example one of my teachers once gave, and I really like it, so I apologize to those who've already heard me use the example, but it's the example of a disciplinarian in a monastery called Geshe. In a monastery, the disciplinarians, the bigger the monastery, the more monks you have, the scarier the disciplinarian, in the sense that, well, they have to look after the discipline of thousands of monks. So it's usually someone who is respected, who is well behaved, who is older. Okay, so older means like 40, 50 maybe, still capable to do this tough job, and they're appointed for 2 years, I believe, so they're appointed based on their qualities. So you label, one day you use the label Geshe, disciplinarian, and now people are scared of this person. You're supposed to be scary, but not scary in like, terrify, everyone is paranoid, not that kind of fear, but like, oops, am I keeping the rules or am I breaking them? Because, monastery people break rules, there's some young monks, etc. So, as it goes, you look at this person and now you need to train yourself disciplinarian, because you don't want to mess around and do things that are not allowed in front of that person. You need to really train yourself. Oh, disciplinarian, disciplinarian. So you label. You keep thinking, disciplinarian, disciplinarian, okay? On the basis of imputation, because he has been appointed. You're not doing that with a stick, you're doing that with the person who's been appointed. Is there something intrinsic that makes him the disciplinarian, other than being appointed? No. Because previously he was the same guy, right? Okay, he changed, but he didn't change so drastically that now he has like the disciplinarian horns or whatever. No, it's just appointed. And before long, you see this person, and no longer are you labeling as like, oh, disciplinarian, as in like you need to remind yourself. Now it seems there's disciplinarian written on his forehead, okay? Suddenly there's something disciplinary youth in that person, right? It's like something there. And then his term is over, and someone else is the disciplinarian, but you're still thinking there's something intrinsic in that person. And you meet him and you go, I know, right? So here, that gives you a good sense of there's something within the person that makes this person the disciplinarian. So when you're scared, like, it seems there's something intrinsic in that person. That is what we're talking about. Can you get a sense of that? How you think of another person as being evil, for instance. You look at them, oh, nothing to do with me calling them that. And if his mother thinks she's nice, she's just wrong. Right? I think this person is evil. His mother loves this person. I think they're horrible. But that's just me saying horrible in relation to X, Y, and Z. Okay? X, Y, and Z is just one aspect. But the whole person becomes horrible. He is horrible. I'm not saying his mind, is horrible. No, the whole person is horrible. And then it seems horrible from his own side. Can you recognize that? Okay. So horrible person. Disciplinarian. Something within this person that has nothing to do with me labeling. Now, that is either one with the aggregates or separate. And if it's separate, unrelated. And the same we have with the I. And of course, I'm this, I'm that. It's the I that is special, the I that is stupid. Oh, we're very good at stupid I too. And then we don't like ourselves, and there's hatred towards the I. It's again a separate stupid I, or a separate failing